Good afternoon. Hello. Welcome to Dulcimoon Talk number 52. I'm Erin May, and today I am joined here by Barbara Truex, who's coming to us from Maine, where it's snowy and
It,
cold.
yep.
And I'm just so thrilled to get a chance to have this conversation and to meet you and to get to know you a little better. I think it was a couple years ago at a chromatic event that I was a part of that somebody mentioned your name and I put it on my desk on a sticky note and sort of set it there thinking okay, I'll come back to this, and then I recently kind of dug into your website and your YouTube videos, and then
Uh-huh.
my next thought was, how did I not know about this person already?
It's funny because when I got your email to do this, I thought, oh, some people still remember me
Oh.
because I haven't been in the sort of heavy dulcimer circles for a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
After many, many years, I just I moved off into some other stuff. So
And you took
and
your dulcimer with you, though, which is the
oh,
part that I think is
absolutely.
really, really cool. Because I have heard some people sort of move away from it, and the dulcimer just sort of fades as a part of their life. And I love that you moved out of sort of the center of dulcimer sphere, but took
Right.
your dulcimer with you into all of those new spaces. So,
Yeah, and I added a couple of other things along the side when I felt like it was time for I needed something chromatic or I needed something in a key that, I don't want to retune. I'll just
yeah,
pick up
yeah.
the tenor guitar instead.
Yeah.
So I've sort of surrounded myself with oddball four-string instruments until 2 weeks ago when a five-string entered the house, and now it's like, oh my. That's almost like going back to the guitar, which I haven't played in 15 years,
Oh, amazing.
So, but yeah, the dulcimer is still extremely important in my musical life.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So take us back in time to how you got started with sort of the music of your early years and how you got into playing music and how did you find the dulcimer to begin with?
Well, as a kid, my dad played the five-string banjo. He wasn't a bluegrass guy. He was more of a homegrown clawhammer style
Hmm.
player
Hmm.
and played a lot of old songs. And he had made part of our basement into a rec room, which ended up being filled with musical instruments. So there
Nice.
was a piano there. He had his banjo. He had ukuleles. There was a mandolin. And then people just gave him stuff. He had an accordion and things like that. It just sort of
Oh, hey, you seem to
mushroomed.
like odd instruments. Here, have this
Yes,
one.
here, have this
Yes.
one. So he and I would spend a lot of time together in the basement, and he showed me some of the chord books. And as a
Mhm.
little kid, I just wanted to play the guitar, but I was too small until I was about 12. So I worked with the ukuleles, and the baritone ukulele was my very first, very own instrument that he gave me. And he showed me how to go through the books and interpret what was there in terms of chord diagrams. And I picked up all the music by ear, and then sort of understanding um, how to read those. I was sort of off on my own at that
Mhm.
point, and but
Mhm.
we would do a lot of music together. So that's how that whole thing started.
Sweet.
And at that time, then also, um, let's say, as we got into the early 60s, we had the whole sort of folk craze going on
Mhm.
with Dylan and Joan Baez and all of those people, and Peter, Paul, and Mary. And I followed all of them and got all their books. And I kept trying to get my friends in school interested, and they humored me once in a while, but it wasn't
Yep. Yep.
wasn't really their thing.
Mm.
But I had a neighbor who was into it, and my dad played with a couple of his friends, and so it kind of just kept rolling. And then um, I lived next door to my aunt and uncle, uh, and in my teenage years, they were very cool and progressive people, both handicapped. My aunt was a dwarf, and her husband was this big guy in a wheelchair named Gil. He had cerebral palsy, but he had no brain malfunction at all. Neither of them did. They were
Mhm.
really great and very artistically minded people. My aunt did a lot of cartoons and stuff like that, and my uncle was a writer and sort of an activist in political circles and stuff. And they ended up with this kind of salon going on next door. So I would pick up my guitar, which I was finally big enough to play, and go over and hang out with all of these other teenagers and people that were older than me that played a lot of music, and it was very cool. So they encouraged me a lot.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Oh.
And when I when I graduated high school, my folks moved out of my hometown that they had grown up in as
Mhm.
well. We moved up county for a while, and I went to I started to figure out what was going on before going off to school for a year. And my mother presented me with an article in the local newspaper that said, "Hey, there's this coffee house." Of course, I was very coffee house savvy by that time.
Mhm.
And she said, "Why don't you go?" And I looked at her and I got, "You never encouraged my music at all." My mother didn't.
Ah.
She
Uh-huh.
just she just didn't she didn't get the music really. Um, and I went, "Okay, I'll go." Why not? So I
Yeah.
decided to go without my guitar because I had been in the same town my whole life. Here I was in a town where nobody knew me, and that was a new
Mhm.
experience.
Yeah.
And so I just went to the coffee house and I just kind of sat in the back, very back, and
Mhm.
got a lay of the land. And I got, well, these people seem pretty cool. There's some really good music going on here. Um,
Mhm.
and during the intermission, I walked up to the person that was the two folks that were sort of emceeing, one in
Mhm.
particular, and the other one helping him out. And I said, "So how do you get to play here?" He said, "You can play right now." I went, "I don't have my guitar." And he said, "We can find you a guitar."
Yeah.
And I said, "But I need to retune it." He said, "I'm sure that'll be okay."
Aw.
And that person, Chris, and I have been married for 53 years.
Aw.
And all of those folks are still my friends.
I love it.
So it was during that next year that as Chris got more familiar with the music that I was interested in, what I was playing, and I packed up and went to school in Worcester, Massachusetts, and he packed up and did some classes in Boston. And he said, "Are you familiar with Richard and Mimi Farina?" And I said, "No." So he played me an album and he said, "I think you'd like this." And I think that dulcimer is kind of cool. And so he played me some of the Farina stuff, and I went, "Oh, that, that is what I need right now. I need one of those."
Uh-huh.
So during the year, we thought, well, how are we going to get one? And
Right.
we cobbled together a little bit of cash, and we found somebody in Cambridge that was making the instruments. And so we took a trip over to Cambridge and found this guy. And I said, "I'm interested in one of these." And he handed it to me, and I just started playing it. And he said, "Have you ever played this before?" And I went, "No, but it just makes perfect sense to me. I mean, I play the guitar, a stringy thing with frets on it. It's not a mystery to me." And this
Uh-huh.
is kind of cool because, yeah, the frets are a little different. That's kind of cool. So he agreed to make one. And I can't remember how long it took to get it,
Mhm.
and maybe a month or so. We went and got it. And the problem with it was, I mean, I was only Was I still 18? Yeah, I was 18, right? So I get this thing and I took it back to my apartment in Worcester and started playing it. It's like, something is not right with this. The intonation was kind of odd.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out, and it was very short, it seemed smaller than his other instruments.
Uh-huh.
And what I was able to determine was he seemed to shorten the string length without changing the mathematics of the frets.
Oh dear.
So it sounded terrible. And we were just so bugged. I never took it back to him. That was one of those young person's stupid things. But I was just completely bugged and really crushed. And I always threatened to turn it into a planter. So I dragged it around for a little while. It never made it to the planter. It finally went into the junk pile. And a year or so later, Chris and I were married, and my birthday was coming up, and we were back in southwestern Connecticut together. There, we'd left Massachusetts, and there was one place in the town we were in Ridgefield, Connecticut, where it was a folk music shop, and the guy that ran the shop was an instrument maker, primarily banjos and guitar. And Chris went in without my knowing and said, "This is what I know she wants. She wants 4 equally spaced strings. She wants a spruce top on the instrument, and no extra frets." And that was the criteria he went by. And I still play that dulcimer today. That is my main dulcimer. And it's just been great. He tried to replicate it, and after making a dozen of them, he gave up making dulcimers. And he tried to buy it back from me several times, and I said, I like this baby. I like this baby. So that was how I came upon the dulcimer. And as soon as I had a nice one in my hands, then I just started writing music. I started fooling around with it, and I started to try and figure out what the heck was going on with it. What is this fretting system? Why is it like this? Why do people talk about those extra frets? And what about music in general? And the dulcimer literally sent me into a 4 or 5 year period of studying music history, jazz guitar, jazz piano, voice, music theory, and writing down music. And it was just my Barb Truex college. I just tried to do everything all at once. And I came out the other end knowing a lot more about the folk music that the dulcimer comes from, knowing a lot more about the jazz that all my friends were playing, and knowing a lot more about communicating with any kind of musician that I would run across, because that was a big thing that I found with other dulcimer players, is that they couldn't talk about what they were doing.
Yeah.
They couldn't talk about they were unable to talk to non-dulcimer players about what they were doing. And it was really fascinating, because an old friend of mine that I took jazz piano from, he would look at me playing the dulcimer and said, "I don't get that." And great. I mean, this guy, I've always looked up to him and his musical ability. And he looks at the dulcimer still to this day and says, "I don't get it."
I don't get it.
So what is going on here? And I decided to take a couple of semesters at a local college in the music department for, freshman music. And one of the classes was sight singing. That was hard. The other one was just an introduction.
Sight singing was super hard for me too. I was like, man, I took it as a pass-fail class, and I was so grateful.
I learned a lot. but I am not a sight singer. I mean,
Nope.
I get a lot of it, but yeah, that just really doing it well now.
Mhm.
And the other class was just a basic theory class and a
Mhm.
basic sort of history music theory class.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we got about I did 2 semesters of each class. So we got into the second semester and I thought, when are they going to talk about modal music? Why does, and because part of the thing was I was dealing with all of these other musicians and I said something
Mhm.
about the modes and they were talking a different language than I was talking. And so that's what I needed to figure out.
Yep.
Well, that the music theory class spent 1 day and like 2 pages
I was gonna say, I think
in
my
the
classical
music book.
music theory class had one paragraph about modes.
Yeah. And I went, oh, that's why nobody understands me. That's
Yeah.
why I can't talk. Okay. All right. Now. And then while I was taking jazz guitar, I took that for about a year and I got to just started to get to the point where I was being introduced to the concepts and the theories of soloing
Uh-huh.
in
Uh-huh.
jazz, where they
Uh-huh.
use the modal names,
They do. That's where it
but
clicked for
not
me
the
too.
same way. But not the same way. So I went, oh, okay. So when I play with somebody and they say, what key or what's going on with this tune, I don't
Mhm.
say it's D Dorian. I say it's minor.
Yeah.
And here's the chord chart.
Yeah.
And I don't say anything else about the modes because they don't need to know.
Mhm.
Um, they need to understand things in a different way. So it was all about communication with the other musicians.
Mhm.
I understood what they didn't know. They didn't have to understand what I knew about dulcimer. They just wanted to play,
Yeah. Yeah.
And that I think was one of the things that frustrated me a lot in the dulcimer community is they get very insular in this dulcimer nomenclature
Mhm.
and language and semantics and they can't get out of that. They can't understand that the general musical community is not going to understand that. And if
Yeah,
you
and it's
want to
so
play with
interesting
that,
because there is a whole different language for classical music, and a different
right?
language for jazz, and a different language for bluegrass, and a different language for, and it's like they all have their own, and a
Yeah,
different language for sound. I know you've done like sound
yeah,
design and audio engineering, and I remember
right.
taking a class where they were like, you can't say the name of the note or the chord, you have to say the frequency of the pitch. And I was like, are you kidding me? Now I have to learn another set of terms for the same
Right,
things. But it's true, there's
right.
all these different sort of like inside of a culture, there's a set of language.
Yeah,
And then there's like all of it is actually universal, but we use all of these different words to describe the same thing. And those words sometimes keep us from understanding each other.
right, right. And it's one thing to say I don't want to go down that road, but it's
Mhm,
another thing to say you don't understand me. This
mhm,
is what I'm saying.
mhm,
And it was I had some interesting times over the years within the dulcimer festivals and not so much with individual students, which
mhm,
I loved because I could work with them on their own level and find out
mhm,
what they were interested in, guide them that way.
mhm, mhm,
But there was a lot of animosity in the dulcimer festival circuit towards what I was, first of all, what I was playing, second of all, how I was talking about it, and and some of the things that I was trying to teach that I didn't fall into the here's your tablature for the day. This is what we're doing. I never did
mhm,
that unless there was a reason to have the tablature there.
mhm,
So there were a couple of really strange incidents very early on in my dulcimer playing where I was literally a ghost in the room and nobody would talk to me. And I thought, okay, I'll go home and I'll call up my jazz and rock and pop people,
Yeah.
and then I'll focus on that. And to the point where I remember a rehearsal, I was working with my group Sidestep that started in the middle 70s, with percussion, violin, guitar, and then we would have guests that would come in, bass and whatnot. And this person, Pete Levin, that I had studied jazz piano with, was often a guest with this group. And
Okay.
we were having a rehearsal one day, and we had asked him to bring in some tunes. And so he brought in a tune by, I think it was Eric Dolphy, jazz guy. He says, I would like to do this. And it was in E flat. And I said, okay. I said, give me 10 minutes. And
Uh-huh.
I left the room and I looked at the chart. It was really a pretty simple chart in terms of the chord structure,
Mhm.
but it was just an E flat. And I went,
Mhm.
okay. And I went and I retuned the dulcimer and I came back in and I said, okay, let's go. And that's a really good example of nobody else needed to know that that's what I had to do. I just
Yeah.
said, I'm going to go retune and come back, and then I'll be able to play this,
Uh-huh.
rather than say I can't play in that key,
Right.
which is a logical comment if you're in a situation where, you know, that key is not going to work for me. Maybe I'll pick up something else to play. But at that point, it was a real challenge because I went E flat, I can do that. And my dulcimer's tuned low anyway. So I just went in and tuned it down to
I
sort of the
relate to
B
your I
flat and
relate
E
to so
flat.
many of your stories so much because I had an experience of playing with my church's worship band. And
Uh-huh.
at first, it was a bunch of just only acoustic instruments, and we were all playing in G and A and D and whatever. And I
Right.
found the chords to it. And then we
Yeah.
got like a new piano player. She brought in all this stuff in E flat and B flat, and I was
Uh-huh.
like, well, I gotta just figure out a way to do it. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say I can't play that. No,
Right.
I'm not doing that. And I just kept figuring out ways of playing something that worked, no
Something.
matter what she threw at me. Because I just didn't like, I didn't hold an internal belief that like the instrument itself was going to limit me from playing the music
Yeah.
that was being presented. And it is interesting that like that it is kind of cyclical because that same story keeps coming back around.
Uh-huh.
And there, I still hear that a lot of like, well, I can't do that. And I go, well, I don't, that's your choice, I guess.
Well, yeah, and I think that sort of leads to the issue of, okay, um my whole idea about teaching somebody was to teach them the tools that they needed to make the music that they wanted
I
to
love
make.
it.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
So it doesn't, things like, um, it's certainly fine to say, I'm, it's more difficult for me to play in that key. I mean, asking
Mhm.
a clarinet player to play in
To play
A.
D major is also, yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
like it presents its own set of problems. And some of them will dive in and give it a whirl, and some of them will say, "Can we change it?"
yeah.
And that's fine. But what I always wanted my students to be able to do is to be able to make that decision with the knowledge they
Mhm.
had, not with
Mhm.
the knowledge they didn't have. And that makes a big difference. It makes a big difference in your attitude about how you play with other people.
Mhm.
It makes a big difference in the choices that you make and the challenges that you want to present yourself to say, no, damn it, I'm going to play that. They're not going to tell me I can't do it. Don't tell me I
Yes,
can't do it. Um,
right. I don't believe you. I'm not buying it.
right. um,
Me
so
too.
So, and with the dulcimer in particular, because it's generally not a chromatic instrument,
Yeah.
or somewhere in between, depending on what you've
Mhm.
added or
Mhm.
not added onto your fingerboard.
Yeah.
Understanding where that modal system comes from, understanding where it comes from and appreciating its history gives you a wealth of knowledge about how to work with it
Yeah.
and what to do. I instinctively always wanted four equally spaced strings,
Yeah, I was gonna
probably
ask you to
coming
tell me
from
more about that.
the point of a guitar with the six
Uh-huh.
strings and going
Uh-huh.
three. But
Doesn't seem like enough.
all the chords I like are four-note chords.
Yeah. So what tuning do you have, sort of a home base tuning that's your starting point tuning?
Yes, which developed after a while. I used to
Mhm.
retune a lot in the early days, and
Mhm.
then I just kind of got tired of it.
I know when
So
I talked to Aubrey, she's like, I think I play in 80 different tunings or something
yeah, it's
ridiculous like that. And I'm like, good for you. And that feels like a lot to remember all of
uh,
the different combinations.
it is a lot. So my dulcimer finger, the string length is longer than most.
Okay.
So D is not my home base.
Hmm.
C is my home base.
Hmm.
And so from bass to treble, I tune C, G, C, and my first string is a D. That gives
Okay.
me a C and a D together.
Uh-huh.
It's a great tuning for rhythm playing, which is primarily what I am.
Hmm.
I do some melody stuff, but that is not my forte.
Okay.
Rhythm playing is my forte.
Yeah.
And I discovered that tuning um, playing with a friend who is a songwriter. We didn't do any gigs together, but we would get together and just play music. And
Mhm.
he did a lot of stuff in D, and sometimes he did stuff in G. He did a lot of stuff in G,
Mhm.
and I thought, okay, I'm not tuning my dulcimer up to a D center because
Mhm.
it doesn't sound good. The strings are too tight,
Okay.
and it sounds like this, and I really hate that sound.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But I thought, okay, maybe if I tuned the first string up to D, that would give me the F sharp. That would allow for some other things. And so I started working with that tuning with him, and it became the go-to. It
Sweet.
allows me I can tune that D string down
Uh-huh.
to a C and have a standard Mixolydian
Mhm.
approach. I can tune the G string down to an F, and I do some things with
Yep.
that.
Yep.
And sometimes I'll leave the D up, and sometimes I won't. Depends
Mhm.
on the piece of music. But
Mhm.
between those two or three things, that gives me everything I need in terms of the dulcimer and the music and the folks that I'm playing with at the moment. And if none of that satisfies anything, then I go to the banjo ukulele, or I go to the tenor guitar, or I
Mhm.
go to percussion.
Mhm.
So I have a lot of choices
Yeah.
there. But
Yeah.
that tuning, no, C G C, sorry, D.
Yeah, that's not one I've tried, so I'm gonna go set up my four quintessent dulcimer in that tuning for a little bit and see what I discover.
It's very interesting. It gives you some really nice chords. Um,
Mhm.
the and another thing that's kind of interesting with it is if you just look at it as an open chord, it's like a
Yeah,
C add 9,
right?
which
Yeah.
harmonically has been something that even when I go back to my old music, there's always add nines in there. I don't There's something about the sound I
Mhm.
really like.
Mhm.
So there are things like one of the traditional pieces that I do, where I actually do the melody and I can do it as a solo, is a Skyboat song. And
Yeah.
I do it with that. I play the melody mostly on the G string, on the third string.
Okay.
And the D is a drone.
Mhm.
and it puts a really interesting. It would work just fine as if it was a straight Mixolydian tuning.
Mm-hmm.
But I've done it so much with that D drone now that the straight Mixolydian tuning is boring to me for that
Yes.
particular tune.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But that interesting uh, drone of the D, it's like, why is
Mm-hmm.
this working? I don't know, but it works in my
Right. It's like
ears.
there's a little bit of tension in it, but not so much tension that you want it to resolve.
Right, right. And maybe it's because it keeps trying to push you to that tonic center, to that
Mhm.
resolve. I don't know. I don't know what the theory might be to it, but it's one of those things. Well, yeah, that works. I'm just going to leave it in that tuning.
Uh-huh. Nice. Yeah. Very
So,
cool.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So my at this point, for the most part, my acoustic dulcimer is the one that I would tend to retune. The
Mhm.
electric I keep in that tuning almost
Okay.
exclusively.
Yeah.
Um, uh,
So I
and
was curious because the electric and the, especially women in using sort of electronics and sound design is even more rare than all of the other things you've been talking about. So I'm interested in how you got into electric dulcimer and doing some of the sound side and that piece of it too.
I got into it with my friendship with John Molyneux in the mid '80s. I had been introduced to him, and we struck up a friendship. It's sort of in the leading up to '85. And in 1985, we actually did a cross country trip together. We played separately, but we traveled to and we're
Mhm.
playing at the same places. And that during that trip, he had new dulcimer that he had built for himself. He was a violin maker and built dulcimers for himself. And he had an electric one that he was traveling with. And at the end of the trip, I said, I want one of those.
Mhm.
And he was playing it. I mean, John's music is more more traditionally oriented than mine is, but he was doing that on the electric dulcimer.
Mhm.
And so 2 years later, he was coming over again, and I said, "Okay, I'll book your tour for a dulcimer." I mean, I paid him some money on top of it too. It wasn't a total trade, but that
Uh-huh.
was a big part of the trade.
That's
And
great. Yeah.
he brought me the dulcimer that he made, and and he made them for me and him, and that's it. He's never made one for anybody
Wow.
else. And it's great. It has a mute on it so that you can mute the strings, and then it sounds kind of like a marimba, which is
Uh-huh.
very cool. We kept it to the same string length as my
Mhm.
acoustic,
Mhm.
but the fingerboard is just a little bit wider. It has more of a spacing of a steel string guitar than
Okay.
my acoustic dulcimer,
Mhm.
which is really skinny, skinny.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and and so with that, the pickup that is on that is not an off the shelf pickup. He knew an electronics wizard in France named Michel Benedetti, who used to hand wind these pickups, build them by hand for
Wow.
jazz people and rock and basses and stuff like that. And so John had had him do that for his dulcimer, so he had him do it for my dulcimer. The pickup is so hot, and there are no controls on the instrument at all. There's no volume, there's
Uh-huh.
no nothing.
Uh-huh.
That forced me into getting a volume pedal
Okay.
so that I could control the volume, because the
Mhm.
pickup, if I plug that directly into an amp, it's I don't want that much distortion. I want to back off on that a
Uh-huh.
little bit,
Uh-huh.
you know. So it got me into the volume pedal, which is a technique in and of itself. So I started to discover the things that I could do with the volume pedal.
Mm-hmm.
And then I discovered that if I used a dobro slide on it, I could use it as a slide, at which point I can play any note you want, whether
True. Yes.
whether it's
Uh-huh.
on the frets or not. Um,
Uh-huh.
and so I started to work on that technique as well. And then I would add a couple of other things. I'm not a big electronics techie person because I don't want that much choice.
Mm-hmm.
I need to have a few things that work.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
to this day, the delay pedal I have is a line 6, and it still has the 3 program settings that I use in a world music Afro Latin group that I played in the mid 2000s. It still has those 3 settings because
Uh-huh.
those are the ones that I found that worked really well,
Yeah.
that would fit all the situations that I needed, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to figure out anything else. So that's how I
If
operate. It's
it's
like,
not
this
broke,
works.
don't fix
Don't
it.
fix it. Exactly.
But dig and explore until you find the thing you need to do what you want to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So my equipment is really old, but it still works.
Yeah.
Um, and and then I at this point I go in and out of using the electric. It
Mm-hmm.
depends on who I'm playing with. When the busiest group I'm in right now plays started from a point of traditional French dance music, continental French dance music, and a good portion from Brittany. And the acoustic dulcimer is great for that. And we've
Yeah.
tried to work in the electric, and at some point maybe we will, but that's just something else for me to carry around.
Mm-hmm.
So I stay with the tenor guitar and the banjo ukulele and the acoustic dulcimer for that group.
Okay.
There was my old group Sidestep is very much a place where the electric works, which we do a lot of improvisational stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I played with oh gosh, I've done so many things, but there were times in the I played with a sort of street band, vaudeville, whatever the heck it was, called the
Yeah.
Dark
I saw that
Follies
on
for
your
a while.
website. I was like, oh, this sounds fun.
And sometimes the electric would work its way into that, more in a
Yeah.
concert situation, not on the street. On
Yeah.
the street, it was mostly percussion. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
but yeah, so it depends on the situation,
Right.
and it depends on the situation and how much stuff I want to carry around.
Yeah. I get that. I definitely do. So I'm interested in pulling out a little bit more about how you work with the dulcimer and ensembles, because that's another thing. Like I've just most of what I've observed is dulcimer players are sort of lone players, right? They
Yeah,
might sort of collaborate here or there, maybe with like another dulcimer player, or maybe if they're real ambitious, like a guitar player.
all
And
right.
I grew up playing with my family. My dad was playing mandolin, my sister was playing fiddle, and there were times like I remember going to a dulcimer festival where I'm teaching a class about how to jam with multi instruments, and someone looks me square in the eyes and says, dulcimers can't play with fiddles. And I was like, I'm literally touring full time with my sister who is a fiddle player. Like that's my
Right.
whole life right now. And they were
Yep.
like, that you can't do it. And I was just
You
like,
see? Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
know what to say to you except that I can do it.
That's why I left the dulcimer community, because there were too many times that happened. And that wasn't the only thing I was doing. I had
Right.
active stuff that was going
Right.
on.
You're like, I
It's like,
am doing the
yeah,
thing.
yeah, you don't even know. Um, yeah. And those other people that I was playing with and have played with and do play with, they appreciate they liked the sound of the dulcimer. It
Yeah,
was interesting to them because it was different. So what can
that's
we do
been
with
my
that?
experience too.
Yeah. So it, and I mean, I did a fair amount of solo stuff when I was very young because that's how you get started. I
Yeah.
don't particularly like playing solo.
Me
I
too.
like playing with other people
Yeah.
because that's where I get fed that
Mhm.
inspiration from other people.
Right.
And there are things like COVID that absolutely confirmed that because I really didn't play during COVID. And there
Mm.
was a point where I didn't know if I was going to play
Yeah.
because it was just all so weird. Fortunately, that didn't happen, but I didn't, I just rely on other people. I like that give and take.
Mhm.
And the other thing was that when trying to remember now, well, there were a couple of times after that cross country trip with John Molyneux. One of the things that did for me with the stuff that I was dealing with, I came back to my friends in Connecticut and I really realized that I was an improviser. That
Mhm.
trip taught me that my jumping off point is as an improviser.
Uh-huh.
I like doing structured material. I like having homework that I have to work on for something, but I will always come to things as an improviser
Mhm.
first.
Mhm.
And um, and that is most fun with other people.
In fact, it's really hard for me anyway. It's really hard to practice improvisation where I get outside of what is my like comfortable safe notes
Yeah,
without that external thing because I can only imagine what I've already imagined for
yeah,
my with myself, and then I
right,
get with other people and like, oh, there's a different texture all of a sudden, and then I
right.
find myself responding musically to that thing, and then I'm in a place that I never went before with my instrument.
Exactly. And it teaches you how to listen. That I mean, that's probably one of the biggest, most important things about um, uh, and the fun part of doing improvisation is listening to what it's not about filling all the spaces.
Mhm.
It's about listening and responding to what's going on in the room. Um, and so that was a turning point for me in the mid 80s. And once I got sort of out of that, then I began to realize that my comfort zone was really as a rhythm player. And I could say that yeah, that's where my strength is
Mhm.
as a rhythm player, as a support structure for a structured tune and even sometimes an improvisation, a lot of
Mhm.
times an improvisation. And that helped to clarify my role as a musician as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And I like that. I can comp on a pattern and listen to everybody else solo over it until the cows come home. And
Mhm.
I'm happy doing that. And a lot of people are not. A lot of people
Mhm.
are, oh, this is so boring. I don't want to keep it up. But what I love about it is the rhythm part. The, there are moments where it can go on automatic pilot, and then
Mhm.
you can just enjoy all the other things that people
And
are
there can be
doing.
all these little nuances to the push and
Yeah,
pull rhythmically that happens even when you're keeping it the same.
sure,
Um,
sure.
yeah, my favorite part, I'm more of a bluegrass background than a jazz background, but
Uh-huh.
my favorite jams are these like five-person bluegrass jams where everyone in the jam is listening really intently to each other.
Right.
And when a soloist begins to pull in a direction, the rhythm doesn't change, the chords don't change, and somehow everything changes and the whole jam shifts a little bit. And then
Yeah.
it like, and when it's doing that with those little shifts that I don't even necessarily always know how to describe,
Uh-huh.
there's just some magic that happens in that, and it doesn't feel boring at all to be the rhythm player in that setting.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's true. So that's, and those moments of clarity only come with doing it and playing with a bunch of different people and trying a bunch of different things, and then realizing, no, this is my strong point, which doesn't mean that the you don't keep looking for challenges. But
Mhm.
I my more recent challenges in the last few years in terms of percussion was getting into Middle Eastern rhythms and doing that sort of thing. And there's a lot of interesting things in this French dance music that don't stay in one time signature. And
Uh-huh.
that's really fun. It's
Yeah.
not Irish music, it's not
Uh-huh.
Scottish music,
Uh-huh.
it's different.
Yeah.
And yes, there are those things that are pretty straight ahead and going, but there's at least the group Le Bon Truc that I'm playing with, we're getting more and more into these things that, well, it's in five for a while, and then there's a measure of four, just
Mhm.
at the end,
Uh-huh.
or
Uh-huh.
it changes, it goes back and forth between a four and a three and a four and a three, and those kinds of things are really fun. They're really fun. And
Mhm.
sometimes they're hard, and sometimes you just have to count
Right.
until it becomes second
Yeah.
nature and you
Yeah.
get it in your bloodstream,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's the kind of challenge I really
Awesome.
like.
Yeah.
Yeah, really
Well, it's
fun.
becoming clear to me, Barbara, that I could talk to you probably all day. I've realized like we haven't even scratched the surface of a lot of the projects that you've done. And I'm cognizant that we've been talking for 45 minutes
Oh my
because the
gosh.
time just flies away
Yeah.
as we get to share our stories and our conversations. So, probably need to land the plane at some point here. So, you want to tell folks sort of how to find you, what you're up to now, what's the creative life that you're living in this moment?
Um, one thing is I was gifted a dulcimer recently from an old student of mine, and I opened it up and I went, I got to talk to Jerry Rockwell about this. It's basically a pretty strong instrument, but it had three strings spread over a 2 inch wide.
Wow.
I'm going to get lost in between the strings on this.
Yeah.
So
Especially if you're used to playing four equidistant on a narrow
yeah,
fretboard.
right. So he just turned it into a 5 string baritone for
Oh.
me, and that's cool. I haven't sat down and just noodled on a dulcimer in a really long time,
Mm.
and so that's one thing that I'm working
So
on.
how do you
Going,
have it
okay.
tuned right now?
Well, he gave me a tuning of, let's see, from bass to treble, G, D, G, G, C. It's kind of interesting.
Another fascinating
It is.
tuning.
I'm going to work with it for a little while before I start
Those
mucking
G's
with
and
it too.
D's next to each other. The C and D is
The
in
C, yeah,
your tuning and that tuning, isn't
yeah.
it?
So
Uh-huh.
so there are some things that are going on that are familiar.
Mhm.
It's like the bottom three strings are sort of your standard Mixolydian
Yeah.
setup.
Yeah.
The top three strings are like a reverse Ionian.
Uh-huh. And your melody string
kind
is
of
like
a
kind of in the middle of that
yeah.
for both of those.
There are some cool chords in there and stuff. I got to get a pickup for it and stuff like that. But it's interesting, and with the 5 strings, and it has a 6.5 fret. So I'm on a little overwhelmed at
Overload.
the moment. A little overwhelmed.
Wow.
So that's one thing that's going on. The French group is pretty active, and then my old group Sidestep. We went in the studio last year. We're trying to finish up that recording, and we've been going through a lot of our archives. We've been playing together for 50 years. So
That's amazing.
we've been digging out rehearsal tapes and concert tapes and listening to that and working on this new recording, and that's a lot right now. Um, and I probably will start getting back together with a friend of mine who's a Middle Eastern style percussionist that we've done several things over the years, and then not anything for a few months, and we're talking about getting back together again and doing something else. So that's a lot of what's going on right
That's
now.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your website is barbtruex.com, right?
Barbtruexmusic.com.
Barbtruex Music. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Good. We'll
think
make sure
I
that
think
link
it's
gets shared too. But
yeah. I think if you do the old one might have been barbtruex.com, and that might still be active. I
it
can't
might
remember
point
now.
to it, I think. I think that's
Yeah.
how I found it at some point. But
Yeah.
yeah, we'll make
I'm
sure
ter-
the link gets shared
I'm
around.
terrible about keeping that up, but so I actually did a blog post maybe a month ago, and I hadn't done anything for a year. So there you go.
I understand. It's hard to keep up with all the things to let people know about all the things you're doing when you're just doing all the things. So
Yes, exactly.
so keep doing all the things. I love the music that you're making. I love that you bring the like traditional diatonic mountain dulcimer into these really unexpected spaces and you're just doing it because of course you are.
It's fun. The amount of stuff that you can find, particularly for the with the four strings, is a lot. There's a lot there, and I like, as I mentioned earlier, not having so many choices to
Yeah.
deal with. I like it saying, okay, you only have this many things. Now do something with that many things. That's where I thrive. That's
Uh,
why I don't play the piano. Too many
yeah.
notes.
Constraints are a powerful source of creativity.
Yeah, they are.
Mhm.
And the dulcimer, I find that the a lot of the music sometimes writes itself because it's
Mm.
full of surprises all the time.
Mhm.
Because I'm not yet generally attacking it academically.
Mhm.
I'm just finding the things, the harmonic sense that works for me.
Mhm.
And I'm always surprised. Even 50 years later, I'm still surprised.
That makes me so happy because my favorite part about being a dulcimer player is that I've never reached the end of what I feel like is available to explore.
Yeah.
There's just every time I start to get like a tiny bit bored with one thing, I find this whole new world to just delve into and
Right.
explore. So it makes me really excited that like that's still never gonna end. Yes.
Good.
Thank you so much, Barb. It was wonderful to have this conversation with you, and I
Thank
really
you.
hope we get a chance to connect again and stay in touch someday and
Yep.
hopefully play tunes together, sit
Yeah, that
down and
would be great.
improvise. I would
And
love that.
keep up the good work you're doing. It's very exciting. Very exciting.
Yay. Thank
Thank
you.
you for having me.
Bye, friends.
Bye.
I feel like I've met a new kindred spirit.
Yeah.